Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi, 1 week at a time, Masachet Beitzah. Today we are going to, this is our second class in Masachet Beitzah, and we are going to be reviewing Daf 7 through 14. And I would say those of you who are learning every day, these dafim are intense. There's a lot of information on every daf. So we are going to try to review them and help everyone try to understand these dafim as much as possible. As I mentioned last week, there are a lot of fundamental concepts that we're going to see in these pages, and this week is no exception. So let's begin on Daf 7. We're still talking about the egg that comes out that's laid on the festival, and here there's a discussion if a majority of the egg comes out and then maybe goes back in, would that be considered complete, or it needs to come out fully? That's Rav's question, Rav's opinion, and then a question on that at the top of 7. Versus, and here there's a discussion, an egg that's laid versus eggs that are found in a shechted, in a already slaughtered chicken. If they're complete inside, meaning they're fully formed, but they're still inside the chicken, you can still eat it with milk. Meaning one might think, since it was found in a meat environment, that it too is part of the chicken and therefore it is meat and cannot be eaten with dairy. That is not true. As long as they are fully formed, you can eat them with milk. If, however, they're still connected with the sinews, then they are really considered part of the chicken, and therefore you cannot eat it with milk. Here there's a very interesting line on Daf 7. The Gemara tells us that things or animals or beings that cohabit during the day, they give birth during the day. Animals that cohabit at night, they give birth at night, and human beings who cohabit during the day or the night can give birth in the day or in the night. And the Gemara asks, why is this important? Because we should know that chickens in general lay eggs during the day because they cohabit during the day, and therefore if you check, as opposed to bats that cohabit at night and therefore give birth at night. But the Gemara basically teaches us that if you checked the nest before the festival during the day, and then the next day before sunset, you check the nest and there are eggs, you can assume that the eggs were laid before the festival, because the Gemara teaches us that for fertilized eggs are, again, if they were fertilized, they were that happened during the day, and therefore they would be laid only during the day and not at night. However, says the Gemara, if we're talking about unfertilized eggs, then of course those can be laid during the day or at night. So then we would not be sure when this egg was laid. Again, as we mentioned last week, if the egg was laid before the festival, one could eat it on the festival. However, if it was laid on the day of the festival, then one cannot eat it. Okay. From here, the Gemara goes on to a different topic, and that is the amount that we would be liable if we ate chametz, leavened food, versus the amount that makes us liable if you eat what's called seor. Seor is a leavening agent. It's basically like the starter. Let's say for sourdough, that would be called seor. And here there's a machloket, a disagreement between Beit Hillel and Beit Shamai, if the amount, the shiur, is the same for these two things, or are they different? the Gemara continues and tells us, and here is another new concept. I think we have mentioned it previously, not in this Masachet, but in other Masechtot. There is a mitzvah that if you slaughter a bird or a wild animal, like a deer, to eat, then the blood that spills on the floor must be covered with dirt. The commandment, the mitzvah, is called kisui hadam. That is true for, as I mentioned, wild animals and birds, not for behemoth, for domesticated animals. And here there's a question that if you slaughter a bird or a wild animal, how do you cover the blood? Meaning, if you prepared the dirt beforehand, then you can slaughter these animals. But if not, then you cannot slaughter them. That's opinion number one. The other opinion is no, you can slaughter them, and if you didn't prepare them, it's okay. You could still basically shovel out some dirt, even though it was not prepared before the festival. The question then is, let's say you're going to dig up this dirt. Do you slaughter the animal first and then dig it up, or do you dig up the dirt first, have it prepared, and then you slaughter the animal? Okay, we're going to move on to daf number 8, and Beit Hillel basically tells us that the dirt has to be ready before the festival, and if you want, you can stick the shovel in the ground before the festival, and then on the festival, on the Yom Tov, you just pick up the shovel, and then it is already ready to use. The Gemara says that you can even use ashes from the oven, because again, those are also available or ready to use on the festival, or maybe not, says the Gemara. From here, the Gemara continues. As I mentioned, we have the wild animal and the bird need to have the blood covered. There is a famous animal that is mentioned in the Gemara. It's called a koi. A koi seems to be an animal that they're not sure if it's wild or domesticated. And it is usually brought up when we're discussing things that are bisafek, things that we're not sure if they are, again, we're not sure if it's a domesticated animal or a wild animal. And therefore, the Gemara says that you cannot shecht, you cannot slaughter the koi on a festival because, again, because it's a safek, because we're unsure if you need to cover its blood, therefore we're not going to allow you to dig up the dirt on the festival because it is only a safek, because it's only, we're still not sure if you actually need to do it or not. Okay. Let us continue. Okay, again, or maybe you don't cover the blood of the koi because we're concerned that you might think that it is like the wild animal and that the fats of this wild animal, again, for a wild animal, you're allowed to eat certain fats. It's called chelev. You're allowed to eat the certain fats in wild animals, but not in a domesticated animal. And here again, the koi, because we don't know if it is domesticated or not, we're going to be stringent in all cases. Therefore, we'll be stringent and say you have to cover the blood. We'll be stringent and say you cannot eat the fats like a domesticated animal. So we say you cannot slaughter this animal on the festival lest you think that it is like a domesticated animal and that you can eat the fats, even though we say that you cannot. What happens, what happens if the blood of a domesticated animal gets mixed up with the blood of an undomesticated animal, a behema and a chaya? What happens if the blood got mixed up? So then you do not cover it. on the festival if it can't be covered with one scoopful, right? If it's a lot of blood, we say we don't want you doing too much on this festival, and therefore you do not cover that blood. Daf number 9 talks about what about making dough? If we make dough on the festival, again, this is going to be, we're going to learn many new laws that pertain to cooking on the festival. So the Gemara tells us that you can make dough in order to bake on the festival, and you can take challah, right? You can separate challah on the festival, or maybe you can't, meaning we're concerned that maybe you will separate other things on the festival as well. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. Second. Okay. So the Gemara continues and says that that again that you can take off the challah on Yom Tov. You can separate the challah on Yom Tov. Okay. The next Mishnah on Daf 9 is okay. I have some pictures for you. Again, thank you to Daf HaChaim for the beautiful illustrations, or I think just interesting illustrations. We're moving on. We were talking about eggs that were laid on the festival. We're now going to move on to the birds themselves. Now, again, as we mentioned previously, you can slaughter, you can shecht a bird on the festival in order to eat it, to have a barbecue or grilled pigeon, as we'll see in a minute. You can have birds, you can shecht them on the festival. So we're going to talk about these dovecotes. You can see here there are special houses where these doves live. So the Mishnah tells us, and also one more introductory note, the following Mishnayot that we're going to be learning this week are all going to be machlokot, differences of opinions between Beit Shamai and Beit Hillel. In general, and we're going to see this in a little bit, in general, Beit Hillel is more lenient and Beit Shamai is more stringent. We're going to see that that is not the case in a number of the cases that we're going to see today, and we'll see why in a little bit. Okay, so the Mishnah tells us that Beit Shamai says that you cannot move the ladder from one coop to the next. Again, here you can see you have various coops or dovecotes, and you cannot move the ladder from one to the other in order to get different birds, but you can lean it to different windows. You can see here there are arrows that one dovecote has different kind of windows for right, there are nests in each window, so you can lean it from one to the other, but not to a completely different dovecote on the festival. Beit Hillel say no, you can even move the ladder from one to the other. The Gemara explains that what is the machloket, what is the difference of opinion? We're talking about being in the public domain, in the Reshut Harabim. And as we've seen before, definitely in Masechet Shabbat, that you are not allowed to move things in the public domain, and therefore we have an issue of moving this ladder from one dovecote to the other in the public domain. However, if this is in your backyard, in your private domain, so then you would be able to move the ladder. Or the Gemara suggests, no, just like you can't move it in the public domain, so too you cannot move it in the private domain. Or maybe the difference of opinion between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai is in the private domain, are you allowed to move the ladder? But maybe everybody agrees that in the public domain, everybody agrees that you cannot move the ladder. Okay, so again, another way we just explained it as moving the ladder in order to retrieve the birds on the festival, because you want to eat the birds on the festival. Another opinion is that the difference is, or the case is really returning the ladder to its original place. Meaning, let's say you take an attic ladder. Again, in those days, they built very short houses, and if they would build a second floor, it was like a loft, and that would have a ladder. Maybe you can take an attic ladder and retrieve a bird, but definitely, or the Gemara says, no, you cannot use this attic ladder because that looks like you're going to fix the roof, and that does not look good. Again, interestingly, here we have the concept of, I guess in Hebrew English, you would say maris ayin, or in Hebrew, you would say ma'arit ayin. The idea is that it doesn't look good. We might not necessarily be doing something wrong, but it gives an impression that we are going to do something wrong. And that's an interesting concept. I think actually, as we are almost at Yom Kippur tomorrow night, it's interesting to think about, right? We talk about doing good deeds and doing transgressions or sins. Here, the Gemara is even talking about you might have, very good intentions, but it might not look good. You might be doing something that people might mistaken for doing something wrong, and that is also problematic. Again, obviously less problematic, but I think here the Gemara is trying to make us sensitive to our actions, to the way things look, and not to give the false impressions. So I thought that was just very interesting. Okay, the Gemara continues and says that here we are talking about what's called Simchat Yom Tov. We are now on Daf 9, and the Gemara, we're in the middle of Daf 9, and the Gemara says that we're talking about what's called Simchat Yom Tov. Simchat Yom Tov means it is very important to enjoy the festival, as we're next week going to celebrate the festival of Sukkot. The Torah tells us that we need to enjoy the festival. One part of that, not for vegetarians, but for meat eaters, part of enjoying the festival is eating meat, eating these birds that we've been talking about, and therefore we're going to try to allow you as much enjoyment as possible. So here it seems, again, the Gemara says that in our Mishnah that we just mentioned, Beit Shamai is being stringent in terms of our ladder, not letting you move the ladder from one dovecote to another. But Beit Hillel is being very lenient. However, if you remember in our first Mishnah that we talked about last week, Beit Shamai was actually more lenient than Beit Hillel. So the Gemara now is asking, how could that be? How could it be that on one hand Beit Shamai is stringent, and on the other hand they're lenient, and it's all dealing with the same idea of enjoying the festival? So one option is, let's switch the opinions. Let's say that really, again, let's keep it consistent and say that, again, Beit Shammai is stringent across the board, and Beit Hillel is lenient across the board. Or, says the Gemara, no, let's figure out how these cases are different, right? And it goes through each one of the cases, and we're going to go through 5 different cases, and we're going to show how when we talked about at the beginning of this class, we talked about being able to pick up the shovel of dirt in order to cover the blood. That might be a different scenario as opposed to the scenario that we're talking about here. Again, as we're talking about, we were talking about now moving the ladder. At the top of Daf 10, we have another scenario, and that is that Beit Shammai tells us and we're actually going to see this Mishnah in a little bit, but it's quoted in the Gemara first. So Beit Shamai says that you cannot take a pestle in order to chop meat on the festival. Again, we'll see that Mishnah in a little bit. Beit Hillel says it's okay. Again, we see that Beit Shammai is being stringent, Beit Hillel is being lenient, and then the Gemara says, but wait a minute, with the shovel, it was reversed. And we say, no, again, these are different cases, and let's not compare them. The next is Beit Shammai say that you can't take hides. Again, let's say if you slaughter an animal, let's say a cow or a sheep, you have the hide. You want to keep it in order to make leather. So the question is, can you put this hide on the floor on the festival so that people will step on it and start the tanning process? So Beit Shammai says no. Beit Hillel say it's okay. Again, stringent and lenient. And the last case is that Beit Shammai say that you cannot remove shutters in the storefronts on Yom Tov, on the festival, and Beit Hillel say it's okay. And here it's very interesting. You'd think, why are people opening up their storefronts on the festival? You are correct in assuming that we're talking about Jewish-owned storefronts. And basically, the Gemara explains that in those days, many times things are done on credit or barter, and therefore you could come to some sort of agreement with a store owner before the festival, and on the festival they would open up their store and allow people to take things that they would need for the festival, right? How many times have we run out of things on Shabbat or on a festival and you're like, I wish I can just go get it, right? So here the Gemara constructs a case where the stores actually open and you either pay for it before or you pay for it afterwards. Okay, our next Mishnah is going to, the next Mishnah talks about designating birds. Again, we have our dovecote, and we said that you want to eat one of your birds on the festival. You want it fresh. Again, in those days, there's no refrigeration. So you are going to take that bird on the festival and slaughter it and then eat it on that day. The question here is, how do you need to designate which bird you are going to take on the festival? Meaning, do you have to designate it beforehand? So the Mishnah tells us that Beit Shammai says that you have to physically designate the bird before the festival, right? You pick it up, or you say, this is the one I want, or it looks really good. Okay, you put it back in its nest, and then tomorrow you can use it. Beit Hillel say no, verbal designation is enough, and therefore that is all you need to do in order to make it prepared, mukhan, ready to be used on the festival itself. Okay. The Gemara explains, what are we nervous about? What's the concern? Right? We're concerned that maybe you'll pick it up on the festival and then you'll say, no, I don't like this one, and you put it down when really these birds are muktzah. Again, we mentioned the concept of muktzah last week. Muktzah means not designated from before the holiday, and therefore, if something is not designated for use before the holiday, you cannot touch it. We're used to saying, "Oh, don't touch that pencil on Shabbat; it's muktzah." That is a different types of muktzah. That means don't touch the pencil lest you come to write with that pencil, right? A pencil is what's called a utensil that is used for something that is prohibited, right? Writing on Shabbat is prohibited. Therefore, you cannot touch the pencil on Shabbat lest you write with it. Here we're talking about Here we're talking about something that was not designated before the festival, and therefore it is muktzah. Um, okay, the other option or the other concept that the Gemara says is, well, what about why can't we just say that you can make some sort of verbal designation before the festival and say, oh, I'm going to take one bird from this dovecote, and then tomorrow on the festival, I'll figure it out, right? I'll choose one, and that will be the one that I had intentions the day before. This is the concept of breira. I think we've mentioned it before. Breira means retroactive designation, meaning at the moment of designation, I do not know which one I'm going to choose, but sometime in the future, I'm going to make a choice, and that is going to affect retroactively. Here, the Gemara says, no, this is not okay. And Hillel, Beit Hillel does not hold by breira, and therefore it is insufficient to just make a general designation. It needs to be very specific. And I like this picture because it showed you, as opposed to before, that little dovecote. Here you have, I would say, an apartment building sized dovecote, where you can see, right, each level has its own nest, and you can find, right, and it houses a dove in each one of these kind of holes. What's very interesting, if anybody has been to archaeological sites in Israel, the Roman name for a dovecote, it was called a columbarium. And that is found, there are numerous places, especially in the Beit area, especially where there was limestone. They would actually make these like holes in the stone wall, and there would be nests where they would raise the birds in these holes. Again, my friend Shuli Mishkin, who's a tour guide, wrote an excellent article on the Hadran site. If anybody's interested in reading all about the pigeons and the doves and what it looked like in the times of the Mishnah and the Talmud. Okay, let's go to the next Mishnah, and here the Mishnah gets, I would say. Maybe we can call it exciting. Let's say you designated it before the festival. Here you can see, just interestingly, those of you who are not familiar, but if you didn't realize that doves and pigeons are actually related, and you can see here on the right the pigeons and on the left the doves. So here the Gemara calls them black versus white. As you can see here. So on Daf 10, we're going to talk about designation. Remember, we just said you have to either physically designate the bird before the festival or verbally designate the bird before the festival. Okay, so now comes the exciting part. The Mishnah tells us, what if you designated black birds and then you left, and in the morning you came back and you found white birds sitting in the nest, right? Again, remember we said every bird has its own house, its own nest. There were black birds, in apartment number 3. And in the morning you got there and now there are white birds in apartment number 3. What do we do, right? What about if you designated, and here we have cute pictures, so I brought it for you. What if you designated 2, and then, right, so you designated, there were 2 birds in the nest. And then in the morning you got there and now there are 3 birds in the nest. Interesting, the Gemara says that you cannot eat any one of these birds. So the blackbirds and the white birds I understand because they're different birds, right? They didn't turn white or black in the morning, overnight. What about here? You designated 2 and now there are 3. we're going to say either, right, and here you can see here, right, either both birds flew away and now you have 3 new birds and therefore you can't eat them, or even if it's the 2 original birds, now there's a 3rd bird who wasn't there beforehand, and I don't know which one is the new bird because you can see here they all look the same, so therefore you cannot eat any of these birds. Okay, let's continue on our cases. What if the opposite? You designated 3 birds, right? There were 3 birds in the nest, and you came back and you saw 2. Okay, now these are okay. You can eat them. Why? We assume that 1 flew away, leaving 2, right? We don't have to assume that all 3 flew away and 2 came back. So that I thought is very interesting. Next case. Okay, you designated birds that were inside the nest, and now you found them outside the nest. So if they're the only birds that live in this area, so then it's okay. But if it's not, so I don't know, right? The 2 birds from the nest could have flown away, and now 2 other birds came to visit. So we because we don't know if they are new birds or old birds, the original birds, so now you cannot eat these birds. Again, we are going to be suspicious on thinking that, the original birds flew away and new birds came. So we understand that with the black and the white. Okay, and now we have another very, very fundamental concept when we're dealing with something that you lost. Okay, you lose something. There are 2 ways to figure out. Right, let's say, again, this is a good example, but let's say you lost a dollar bill, and now you come back and you see a dollar bill, I don't know, a few feet away. It's not in the exact spot that you lost it. So now how do you determine if that dollar bill is yours or not? We are still on Daf 10. So the Gemara says that there are 2 ways to determine if something is what you lost. There are 2 rules. One is called rov, meaning majority, and the other is called karov, meaning proximity. Do we go by, right? Let's say I'm the only one who lives in this courtyard, so the majority of people living here are me. So then I go by, it's mine, so it must be mine. Even if I find it down the block or whatever on the other side of the courtyard, if I'm the only person who lives here, or I own 3 out of 4 of the houses, so then the likelihood is that it's mine. Or do we say karov? It has to be close to my house, but if it's far from my house, I don't know whose it is. So now the question is, what do we go by? The proximity or majority? And the Gemara basically tells us that okay, well, let's see. So here the Gemara says, right, if black birds are the majority of the birds in your area, but they're not necessarily from right next, that nest. Or maybe it's the nest next to it, or we say no, we actually go by karov, what is closest. And here we have like a picture. Oh wait, no, not that picture yet. Okay, we'll leave the money picture in a minute. Wait, I think it's okay. Never mind. We'll go back to the money picture, and we'll see this in a second. Okay, so let's go to the idea of you designated 3 and now you found 2. Remember, we said we assume one of them flew away and the 2 are the original birds. Interestingly, the Gemara makes a parallel to a money case. What if you left money in your drawer and then you come back and you find more money? What do we say, right? Do we say, somebody came and took the original pile and left a whole new pile? Or do we say somebody added to that pile? And here first of all, it's about, is it your money or not? But also, if the money had a certain sanctity, what do we do with this money? And the Gemara goes through numerous different cases. What if you tied the money together in a pouch? What if you tied the birds together? What if you, at the top of Daf 11, the Gemara talks about what if you tied the birds together loosely and they kind of like untied themselves? So then would it be okay? And again, as I talked about, if it goes by proximity or majority, the Gemara says, well, maybe we go by a majority, meaning the birds on the perch. And here, picture of that perch. Oh, here. Okay, here it is, right? Rov and karov, right? Again, majority versus proximity. The first is that we go according to the rov, the majority. And then the Gemara says, well, maybe, and here's the picture I was looking for, right? What if we're talking about, we can't necessarily prove it, because what if we're talking about this like a perch right outside? Again, a bird can fly and land on this perch, or the bird from the inside can come and stand outside. We don't know where the bird came from. What about, and here the Gemara talks about, again, what we're talking about an apartment building dovecote. What if you have the nest, one nest above the other, right? Do we say, and here the Gemara gives a great case of, let's say we have two nests, one above the other, and you found a bird outside of the lower nest. So do we say that it's the lower bird, right, came outside, right? He's on his porch. Or do we say, oh no, the lower bird flew away and the upper bird decided to come downstairs and sit on the perch of the downstairs nest, right? How do we know which bird this is? Or the opposite, what if you designated the upstairs bird, right? Or you found the bird upstairs? Could it be that it's the lower bird that kind of climbed up and is standing outside, or not, and we're not sure? And here the Gemara also teaches us on Daf 11 the idea of how far doves can fly, or how far I need to assume that they can fly. The Gemara says that if there's no dovecote within 50 amot, which is 25 meters, if there's no dovecote within 25 meters, so then you can assume that it's yours and that it didn't come from somewhere else. Interestingly, the Gemara talks about birds kind of hopping from one dovecote to the other, even if they can't fly. But interestingly enough, says the Gemara, that birds will not hop from one nest to another unless they can see their original nest. And therefore, if their nest is around the corner from the new nest, even if it's within 25 meters, we do not assume that the bird hopped over from the other nest, because apparently that's not what doves do. So I thought that was just very interesting. Okay, let's go to the next Mishnah. We're still on Daf 11. The Mishnah talks about this pestle, again, like a mortar and pestle, I don't know, okay? The Gemara talks about using it to chop meat. Again, it's normally not used to chop meat. It's normally used to chop spices, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So the Beit Shamai says that you cannot use it to chop your meat. Beit Hillel says it's okay. And again, Beit Shamai says you cannot take those hides and put them on the floor, but Beit Hillel says it's okay. Again, the other option is maybe we're talking about moving this pestle after you use it, and then the Gemara continues and talks about using a special cutting board that was used by a butcher, and the Gemara says that you can use this special cutting board again on the festival, because again, we're using it for Simchat Yom Tov. We can use it for cutting up the meat, because again, we know that you are going to cut up your meat. You need to cut up your meat, and therefore you're not going to change your mind, and you can already you can use it. Okay, let's go to these hides, right? So the Gemara tells us that they used to sit on these hides on the floor, and that's why Beit Hillel lets you put them on the floor, because again, just because if you walk on it, it might soften them, and it seems like you're starting the tanning process. Beit Hillel says they were also used like rugs, and therefore you can put them on the floor, and it's okay. Okay, the next Mishnah, we did mention this earlier, that Beit Shamai says that you cannot remove the shutters from a window. Again, just to understand what the houses look like in those days, right? They don't have what's a window? It's a hole in your wall. It didn't have glass. It didn't have a screen, right? Basically, what they would do is they would take a shutter, a piece of wood, and they would plug up the hole. That's how they closed the window, and they opened the window by removing that shutter. So the Beit Shammai says you cannot remove that shutter on the festival. Beit Hillel says you can, and you can even put it back. And the Gemara explains that we're not talking about someone's house. Rather, we're talking about these stores that they would be like a booth, and they would use these like shutters as like a shelf in order to show their wares. And Beit Hillel allows you to do this on the festival. Okay. Okay, hold on. So the Gemara then clarifies that again, the shutters are only okay in stores, because again, we want to make sure that the stores open so that people will be able to have access to the food that they need. But interestingly, the Gemara brings up another case of letting the priests in the mikdash, in the temple, be able to bandage themselves. We talked in Masachet Shabbat about not being able to bandage yourself on the festival, on Shabbat, let's say. Again, it's seen as medicine. Again, if you're really bleeding and you need to put on a Band-Aid, you can put on a Band-Aid. Here, I think they were talking about maybe something less important. So the Gemara says that they allowed the priests to do this because if not, they would not then do the work that they needed to do in the temple, and we wanted to make sure that they do their work without these bandages. Okay, and here the Gemara talks about these windows. Do they have some sort of like peg at the bottom that secures them in? That would make it a little bit more problematic. And the Gemara discusses, if there are pegs on the top and the bottom or just in the middle. Okay, Daf 12, the next Mishnah, talks about taking out a Torah scroll or lulav or a child in the public domain on the festival. Beit Shammai says you cannot take these things out on the festival. Beit Hillel says you can, and that is how we paskin, right? Next week on Sukkot, you're allowed to take your lulav and etrog from your house to the shul, even if you do not have an eruv, because Beit Hillel allows us to do this on the festival, not on Shabbat, but on the festival. Okay. Beit Shammai basically says that food is permissible, right? Meaning preparing food is permitted on the festival, but nothing else. We're not going to allow you to do anything else. Beit Hillel says once you can carry food in order to eat, so then you're going to be allowed to carry anything that you would need on the festival, meaning not only food related things on on the festival. Okay, next Mishnah. We have a lot of Mishnayot today. We're still on Daf 12. The next Mishnah talks about Beit Shamai say that you cannot bring challah, meaning not your challah, but the portion that you took off to give to the priest. You cannot bring that or other gifts to the priest on the festival, but you can separate it on the festival, but you shouldn't bring it. Beit Hillel says, no, you can even bring it. Okay, so and here there's a difference in terms of separating these things on the festival. The Gemara says that you are not allowed to separate truma. Again, we have mentioned this before, right? These gifts that were generally done, they were generally separated in the field. It's part of the produce production. That should have been done before the festival, and therefore you cannot separate it on the festival. However, challah, remember we said you're allowed to make dough on the festival, and therefore you can separate the challah on the festival as well. The Gemara explains that maybe there's the difference of opinion is if we're talking about things that were separated before the festival, or are we talking about things that were separated on the festival? And from here, we get into an interesting discussion about rolling, or let's call it separating the chaff from the kernel of wheat. And the Gemara tells us at the bottom of 12 that you are allowed to roll ears of, the ears of wheat. You're allowed to roll them and crack the kernels on the festival in order to eat the grain. Because, and we'll see this later on, you're doing it with what's called a shinui. You're doing it in an abnormal way, and therefore it's okay. And we'll talk about more about this in a second. The Gemara on Daf 13, again, it talks about, and here we're going to separate it. One is separating the chaff from the kernels, and that is what's called finishing the process. And therefore now these kernels are obligated in trumot and masrot, the priestly gifts, the tithes. And then we'll get back to doing what's called a melacha on Shabbat, right? Meaning we're not allowed to separate the chaff from the grain on Shabbat. It's one of the prohibited activities. So here the Gemara on 13 separates them, and then we're going to bring them back together. And basically the Gemara explains that if you're eating one kernel at a time, then you do not have to separate the tithes, the trumot and masrot, because that's snacking. To snack, that's okay. If you were processing an entire bunch of wheat, then it would be obligatory to separate the trumot and masrot before you eat it. So here the Gemara at the bottom of 13 basically says to us that there's a difference between when something is completed in terms of trumot and masrot, and when something is completed in terms of the laws of Shabbat. And here the Gemara explains that for Shabbat, we need what's called malechet machshevet, meaning creative action. As long as you're doing a creative action, then you would be transgressing the Shabbat, but not necessarily in the case of trumot and ma'asrot. And here the Gemara at the bottom of 13 and the top of 14 tells us that when you roll these kernels, you have to do it in, as I said, with a shinui differently. So apparently they used to either do it with a utensil, or they would do it with both hands. And therefore, let's say if you only do it with one hand, or maybe one finger or two fingers, that would be enough of a change, and then that would be okay. The same thing with blowing away the chaff. That is also, you can Again, they normally would blow over two hands. So as long as you're blowing over one hand, that's enough of a difference, and that would be okay to do on the festival. Okay, the next Mishnah, as you can see, we have a lot of Mishnayot. Here, as I mentioned before, we have lots of mortars and pestles. Okay, the Mishnah tells us that Beit Shamai says that you can crush spices on the festival, but you have to use a wooden pestle. You can see here on the right. The normal way the normal way to crush spices was with a stone pestle in a stone mortar, and therefore Beit Shammai says that the shinui, the change that you need to make, is by using a wooden pestle. And for salt, again, this is spices. For salt, Beit Shammai says you have to use an earthenware bowl and a wooden spoon. Beit Hillel say for spices you can do it regular, stone and stone. For salt, you have to use a wooden pestle, but the mortar, the bowl, can be stone. And here we're going to try to understand what's the difference between spices and salt. So there are two options. One is that every dish needs salt. So I guess not everyone agrees with that, but here the Gemara says most dishes, here they say every dish needs some salt. Therefore, you knew that you were going to need salt. You should have crushed it beforehand. And therefore, if you're going to crush it on the festival, we're going to make you do it in a different way. But spices, you don't always need spices, and therefore we're allowing you to do it on the spot. Or another way to look at it is spices might lose their potency, their flavor, if you crush them the day before. Therefore, we'll let you do it on the festival. But salt doesn't lose its flavor. Therefore, you should have done it before. And here again, you see the different crushing utensils. And again, to remind us, we're talking about if we're allowed to cook on Shabbat, you should be allowed to spice your food as well. The next Mishnah is going to talk about something we actually learned in Masechet Shabbat, the concept of borer. Borer means to separate. And here the Mishnah teaches us that so first, just to remind us, on Shabbat, let's say, what's borer, right? Let's say I have a bowl of peas and carrots, and I do not like peas. I only like carrots. I am not allowed to pick out the things I don't like. However, I am allowed, what are the rules for borer on Shabbat? It's three words in Hebrew: ochel, bayad, miyad. Food, I'm allowed to take the food, meaning the thing I want. I'm allowed to choose the thing I want with my hand, biyad, with my hand, miyad, in order to eat it now. I can't separate it for later on in the afternoon. If I'm doing it now, so then I can do it. Okay, what about on the festival? So Beit Shammai says that I need to take the food from the thing I don't want, and I needed to eat it now. So it seems quite similar to Shabbat. Beit Hillel says, no, I can even take out the things that I don't want, and I can even use a utensil, but a small utensil, not a large one, because a large one looks like you're processing something. That's not okay, but a small one is okay. And Rabban Gamliel says you are allowed to actually pour, right? Let's say you can soak lentils, you can soak them in water, and then all the debris floats to the top, and then you can take that debris off on the festival. Okay. The next Mishnah, I keep wanting to say the last Mishnah, but it's not. The second to last Mishnah we're going to do. The last one talks about sending gifts to your friends on the festival. So Beit Shammai says that you can send gifts that are ready to eat. right? You can send them a cake, you can send them cookies, you can send them a salad. You can do that on the festival. Beit Hillel says you can even send a live animal to your friend on the festival so that they can slaughter that animal on the festival and eat it, right? You can send flour, 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 so that they will now take that flour and they can make a cake on the festival. But you cannot send grain, right? Already asking them to grind grain, that's already too much. And all the things have to be, right? Beit Hillel says, as long as you can use them on the festival, you can bring it as a gift. And the last Mishnah of our class today talks about sending clothing or even fabric to your friends on a festival. That is okay, but you cannot send sandals with nails in them. Apparently they're not finished yet, so they're not usable. Therefore, you cannot send that. Or like unstitched shoes that cannot be worn on the festival. If it cannot be worn on the festival, you cannot send it as a gift. And the Gemara says you can even send kilayim. Kilayim is mixed, right, blended fabric, what we would call shatnez, wool and linen together, which is not allowed to be used as clothing. However, the Gemara teaches that it is allowed to be used as curtains. And therefore, you can even send that because maybe they'll hang it up as a curtain in their house. So really, just to summarize, all of these, right, the theme of all of these Mishnayot the theme was that the festival is meant to be enjoyed. We enjoy it by eating fresh food. Therefore, you can cook on the festival. You can even do things that are involved in food preparation, as we saw, crushing spices, even killing the animal. All of these things may be done on the festival in order to enhance the beauty of the festival. And with that, I want to wish everybody, first of all, a Gemar Chatima Tova for Yom Kippur tomorrow, and a Chag Sameach for Sukkot. And I know it's been a little complicated that every week we're learning on a different day, but I don't want to cancel the class. So as an announcement for next week, just to keep you on your toes, next class will be next Thursday. So next Thursday will be the next class. I'll send out an email. It'll be the same time. I'm not changing the time, just the day. So I guess for those of you outside of Israel, you have Sukkot Tuesday and Wednesday. And then so Thursday, we will celebrate together Sukkot, and we will learn together. I'll see if my Wi-Fi is good. Maybe we'll learn from my sukkah. We'll see. So I just want to wish everybody a Chag Sameach, a meaningful Yom Kippur, and a beautiful Sukkot. First of all of you who have learned Masechet Sukkah, I hope you're going to be reminded of all the laws that we learned, whether it's when you're building your Sukkah or when you're shaking your lulav. You can remember all the things that we learned. That's it. Have a really exciting week, and we will see you next week, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
My pleasure.
An easy fast.